They hanged her on the tree for being half-blood, until the rancher cut the rope and called her mine. Edge of the New Mexico Territory, late spring, 1873. A stretch of land where the desert began to bleed into the hills. Wind moved without pause, carrying dust and silence alike. The sun hung high, unrelenting, pouring down over cracked earth and thornbrush. Randy Rayner rode slow, scanning the dry trail for signs of the sorrel mare that had bolted the night before. He had been tracking hoofprints for the better part of the morning, prints half lost in the brittle soil, leading toward a sparse stand of cottonwoods. The air shimmered, hot enough to blister paint off a saddle. Randy tugged his hat lower against the glare and dismounted. He led his horse by the reins, stepping lightly, eyes sweeping the terrain with the practiced calm of a man who had spent more years alone than not. That was when he heard it, a sound so faint it could have been wind through grass. But it came again, a soft, wet gasp, like someone trying to remember how to breathe. He froze. Randy dropped the reins, unslung his rifle from his back, and moved toward the sound with slow, measured steps. Between the trees, the shadows deepened. Birds had gone quiet. The air felt strange, heavier. Then he saw her. She hung by her wrists from the thick branch of an old tree, her arms stretched above her head, body limp and swaying slightly in the wind. A crude wooden sign had been nailed above her. Half-blood don't belong. Randy's breath caught. He took one step back, as if the words themselves could strike. The message was not for her, it was for anyone who might pass by. The girl's skin was sun-dark and streaked with grime. Her long black hair clung to her face in damp ropes. Her dress, what was left of it, was torn, dust-covered, smeared with dried blood. Her legs hung useless, feet barely brushing the dirt. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, stuttering movements. She was alive, barely. Randy lowered his rifle. "Christ," he muttered, stepping forward. Up close, he could see the burns where the rope bit into her wrists, angry and raw. Her lips were split, cheeks hollowed by thirst. One eye was swollen shut. "You hear me, girl?" Randy asked, his voice rough but low. There was no answer. Her head hung like a broken stem. "I ain't here to hurt you." Still no movement. But a sound escaped her, barely more than a whimper. That was enough. Randy reached for his belt, drew his knife. His fingers hovered at the rope, hesitating for the briefest second. That sign still loomed, red and jagged like a warning carved in flesh. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "Not today." With one clean stroke, the knife sliced through the rope. The girl fell forward. Randy caught her just in time. She collapsed into his arms, light as smoke, burning with fever. Her head lolled against his chest. For a moment, she blinked, dazed and unfocused, lips moving without sound. Then her fingers clutched weakly at his shirt, and her body went still. Randy crouched down, cradling her with one arm while reaching for his canteen with the other. He poured a few drops onto a scrap of cloth and dabbed at her mouth. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're safe, at least for the moment." The wind stirred the branches above. The sign creaked. He looked up at it again, then at her, and without another word, he stood, lifting her into his arms. She didn't weigh more than a sack of oats. "You got a name?" he asked, already knowing she wouldn't answer. Silence. "Guess we'll find one." He turned away from the tree, from the sign, from whatever curse they had tried to hang her with. His boots crunched softly over the dry leaves as he walked back toward his horse. Behind him, the sign still swung in the wind, but the girl was no longer beneath it. Later that evening, Randy's ranch, a modest cabin and barn tucked into a dry ravine, miles from any town. The land stretched empty in every direction, broken only by sagebrush and rock. The sun dipped low as Randy Rayner rode into the hollow. Naomi lay sideways in the saddle, unconscious but breathing. Randy dismounted and gently lifted her down, cradling her as if she were glass. The cabin door creaked open under his boot. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of cedar and dust. A single cot stood near the window. He laid her there carefully, then covered her with a clean wool blanket. She stirred, brow twitching, her fingers curled slightly. "Easy," Randy whispered. He lit the oil lamp, its glow flickering against rough wooden walls. Then he crossed the room, fetched his basin, and poured in water from the jug. He warmed it over the stove and returned, crouching beside her. Her face was bruised and dry, streaked with sweat and blood. Without speaking, Randy dipped a cloth into the water and began to clean her skin, gentle, slow, never rushing. He worked with the care of someone used to mending broken things, and afraid this one might fall apart if he wasn't careful. He cleaned her wrists last. The raw grooves from the rope were deep, angry. He paused. His hand hovered above her arm. Then, steady as breath, he wrapped the wounds in linen, tied each knot loose but firm. Hours passed. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters, but inside the cabin it was still. Naomi hadn't spoken, not even in sleep. Randy sat on the floor by the door, watching the shadows shift. Then, sometime after midnight, she stirred again. Her eyes opened, wide, dark, and filled with panic. She jerked upright in the bed, gasping. Her hands clawed at the blanket as if trying to fight her way out. Hey, now," Randy said, standing quickly but keeping his distance. "You're all right. You're safe here." Naomi looked around the cabin, her breathing sharp and uneven. Her gaze landed on him. She flinched back. Randy didn't move closer. "I ain't them," he said softly. "I ain't here to hurt you." She said nothing, just stared, eyes wild. "You don't have to talk. Don't even have to stay," he added. "But I cut you down for a reason, and it wasn't to see you die slow in my house." Her mouth opened. No words came. Randy walked to the shelf, took a cup, and poured water from the jug. He set it on the table by her bed, then stepped back. Naomi watched every movement like a hunted animal. He sat in the corner again, away from her. Silence fell. The wind outside howled, but the cabin held. Eventually, Naomi reached for the cup. Her hands trembled, but she drank. Randy saw it the moment something shifted. The way her shoulders eased, just slightly. The way her eyes no longer looked through him, but at him. Still guarded, still silent, but not empty. She lay back down slowly, cradling the cup. Randy didn't speak again that night. He just watched her drift into sleep. The water half finished in her lap, the linen on her wrists stained faintly red. In the dark, he whispered, mostly to himself, "You're safe here. That's all you need to know." And in the silence that followed, she didn't speak, but she didn't run. The wind blew dry and sharp across the Rayner ranch, stirring the sand into restless curls that skittered over the hard-packed earth. It had been over a week since Randy brought Naomi back, and the silence between them had grown more settled, like a pact neither had spoken aloud. But something else had begun to shift in the air, an unease that he could not quite place. Randy noticed it first in the morning light. A set of footprints, too narrow and too fresh to be his. They curved along the edge of the barn, then disappeared behind the well. The soil there was soft, still holding the print like a memory. Someone had been watching. He kept the discovery to himself, but from that day on, he started sleeping with his rifle laid across his lap, propped against the edge of the door. He double-checked the lock every evening, scanned the horizon for signs of movement before letting the horses out to graze. Each night, he sat on the porch long after the sun dipped below the distant ridges, the lantern at his feet casting flickering shadows across his boots. Naomi had not yet stepped outside. She stayed mostly by the window, wrapped in Randy's old coat, watching the world with guarded eyes. But that changed one evening, just as the last rays of sun stained the ground blood red and the air cooled with the coming of night. Without a word, she pushed the door open and stepped barefoot into the yard. Randy looked up sharply from where he sat whittling a piece of driftwood. He said nothing, only watched as she walked slowly across the dust, her feet light and cautious, like she was relearning the weight of the earth beneath her. In her hand was a long, slender stick. She knelt in the open space near the barn and began to draw. Randy rose, curiosity prickling at the edge of his caution. He approached carefully, not wanting to disturb whatever had pulled her outside. Naomi didn't flinch when he stopped a few feet behind her. Her focus stayed on the dirt as the lines took shape, arching curves, pointed wings, a body flaring into flame. It was a bird, mid-flight, wrapped in fire. "What's that?" Randy asked softly, voice low like it might spook her. She didn't look up. "It's my family's sign," she said, her voice raspy but sure. "Firebird." The silence held for a long beat. Randy crouched beside her, studying the lines. "My mother used to paint it on our tent poles," she continued. "We believed the firebird was a spirit of protection, fierce but never cruel. It flew through flames so others could survive." Her voice caught. "I was supposed to die with them." Randy didn't move. She spoke slowly, as if her throat burned with each word. "They said we killed a white rancher's wife. But we didn't. It was her husband. He beat her. Everyone knew, but we were different, so they blamed us." Naomi's fingers clenched around the stick. "The soldiers came first, then townsfolk, with fire, with ropes. I ran. I saw my brothers shot down outside our tent. My mother," she screamed, "until the flames took her." She dropped the stick. "I was just a girl. They tied me up like some warning. I thought I would die under that tree." Her shoulders trembled, but she didn't cry, not yet. Her eyes stared into the dirt, at the flames she had drawn. Randy didn't speak. He didn't reach for her. Instead, he slowly lowered himself until his hand pressed flat into the ground, right beside the image of the firebird. Fingers splayed, palm grounded. She noticed. Naomi looked over, eyes wet now, but steady. It wasn't a gesture of comfort, it was something deeper, a vow. No words needed, no promises made. Just the weight of his hand in the earth beside her grief, like saying, "I see it. I see you. And I won't look away." And for the first time since Randy had cut her from that tree, Naomi let her tears fall. Not out of fear, but because someone had finally stayed. The air was unnaturally still when the soldiers came. Randy saw the dust first, a thick plume rising on the far ridge, cutting across the sky like smoke from a distant fire. He stood at the fence line, his jaw tightening, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. The glint of brass and the rhythm of hooves confirmed it. U.S. Cavalry. Naomi stood just inside the cabin door, hidden in shadow, watching him watch them. 3 men rode up, but only one dismounted. He was tall, sharp-featured, with boots too polished for the land he stood on. A silver badge gleamed on his chest. Lieutenant Garrett James. His voice cut clean through the dry air. "Randy Rayner." Randy nodded slowly. "That's me." The lieutenant reached into his coat, pulled out a folded paper, and handed it over. "You're a law-abiding man, I take it. Seen this girl around?" Randy unfolded the wanted notice. The sketch was rough, but unmistakable. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, fire in her eyes, even on paper. Her name printed below, Naomi. Wanted for murder and escape. Reward, $75. She's considered dangerous, Garrett continued. Killed a settler's wife, stabbed 2 soldiers on her way out of custody. You'd be doing the country a service if you turned her in. Randy stared at the paper for a long moment. Then he refolded it carefully and handed it back. Ain't seen no girl around here, he said flatly. Garrett cocked his head. You sure about that? You live out here alone? Always have. The lieutenant looked past him, toward the cabin. Mind if we take a look around? I do. Garrett raised an eyebrow. Got something to hide? Randy's voice dropped lower. Only my piece. Would like to keep it. For a moment, the 2 men held each other's gaze like drawn pistols. Then Garrett gave a tight smile and climbed back onto his horse. Well, if you do see anything unusual, Rayner, we'll be nearby. And with that, they rode off, leaving only silence and suspicion behind. Randy watched until the dust swallowed them. Then he turned and walked slowly back toward the house. Naomi was sitting at the table, stiff as stone. She had heard everything. When he stepped inside, she didn't speak at first. She just looked at him with those wide, dark eyes, half afraid, half something else. Then, quietly, she asked, "Why did you lie for me?" Randy set his hat on the peg, then looked at her for a long time, searching for the right words. When they came slow. Because I see you. And I don't see a killer. Her lip trembled just slightly. She looked away, like the weight of being believed was heavier than the rope that once held her. That night, after the sky had turned to coal and the stars blinked through the haze, they sat side by the fire. The wind outside hummed low against the walls, but inside, it was quiet, safe. Naomi had wrapped herself in the woven blanket again, her knees drawn to her chest. Randy sat nearby, sharpening his knife slowly, the sound of stone against steel, steady and calm. After a long silence, Naomi shifted. She turned toward him, eyes reflecting the firelight, and slowly reached out. First, she placed her hand on her own chest, right over her heart. Then she leaned forward and pressed that same hand to his chest, above the place where his heart beat solid and slow beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. Randy froze. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The meaning pulsed between them, quiet and fierce. I am still here, and so are you. His hand rose, not to stop her, not to question, but to cover hers, fingers entwined. In the crackling glow of the fire, something shifted. Not a confession, not a vow, just understanding. And for the first time, neither of them felt alone. The sun was sinking low, casting long gold slashes across the dry earth when the riders came. Randy heard them before he saw them, hooves pounding dirt, voices sharp with the kind of anger that liked to travel in packs. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle slung casually across his back, hat brim shadowing his eyes. 5 men rode into the clearing. At the front was Joe Cormack. Joe had always been a bad man wearing a good man's badge, back when he wore one. Now he was just leather and guns and a mean grin that stretched too far across his face. "Well, hell," Joe called, swinging down from his horse. "You always had a way with strays, Randy, but this one's trouble." Behind him, the other men dismounted, rifles in hand, faces taut with sweat and hate. Randy didn't flinch, didn't speak, just watched. Joe sauntered up to the porch, spitting into the dust. "Word is, you're hiding her. Half-blood girl. Burned a whole settler camp to the ground. Killed a man with his own knife. That true?" Randy didn't answer. Joe gestured toward the cabin. "We're gonna take a look. That all right with you?" "No." That one word cracked the air. Joe blinked. "No?" Randy's voice was low, steady. "This is my land. You're not welcome." Joe chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Randy, don't be a damn fool. We'll torch this whole place if we have to. We're not leaving without her." Randy stepped down from the porch, slow and deliberate. The rifle stayed on his back. "She's not yours to hang," he said. "She's mine to protect." Joe's smile disappeared. "You gonna stop 5 men with that mouth of yours?" "No," Randy said, "but I'll start with you." The air turned razor sharp. For a beat, no one moved. Then Joe lunged. Randy ducked the punch, turned, and slammed his shoulder into Joe's chest, knocking him backward. One of the others raised his rifle, but before he could aim, Randy's hand was already on his, twisting hard until the weapon dropped. He didn't fire, he didn't draw. But he moved like water over stone, fast, relentless, using their weight against them. He dodged, ducked, disarmed. One man tripped over his own boots. Another yelped as Randy cracked a forearm across his nose. Dust kicked up in clouds. Hooves skittered as the horses backed away in panic. The 5th man, youngest, maybe 17, froze mid-motion, eyes wide. "Go," Randy growled. And just like that, it ended. The men scrambled, cursing, dragging Joe to his feet. Randy stood in the center of it all, chest heaving, shirt torn, knuckles bleeding, but his eyes burned with something too fierce for fear. Joe spit blood. "This ain't over." "It is," Randy said, "for you." The men mounted up and galloped off, the sound of retreat echoing against the canyon walls. Naomi had watched everything from the doorway. She hadn't moved, hadn't breathed. But as the dust settled and silence returned, she stepped down off the porch, barefoot in the fading light, eyes locked on him. He turned to her, bloodied, bruised, still standing. And then, for the first time since he'd found her, she spoke his name aloud. Randy. One word. But it held everything: gratitude, wonder, fear, hope. He looked at her, nodded once, slowly. "Yeah," he said, "I'm here." She moved toward him, small steps at first, then faster. And when she reached him, she didn't cry. She just pressed her forehead gently against his chest, right where his heart was still beating hard. He raised his arms, hesitant, then let them fall around her. Not to trap, not to claim, just to hold. In the dying light of day, among blood and dust and the memory of ropes, they stood like that for a long, long time. The wind had softened that night, whispering low through the sagebrush as if the desert itself had grown tired. The stars blinked into view one by one, scattered across the endless dark above Randy Rayner's ranch. Inside the cabin, the lantern cast a soft golden glow across the wooden walls, its flicker stretching shadows long and gentle. Randy sat by the hearth, sharpening his knife in slow, rhythmic motions, though the blade hardly needed it. His hands moved from habit, not necessity. Across the room, Naomi stood near the window, wrapped in one of Randy's old flannel shirts, her dark hair braided loosely down her back. She had been quiet all day, but tonight there was a heaviness in her stillness, something more than fatigue. He glanced at her. "You sleepin' up right now?" She didn't answer at first. Then she turned, walking slowly toward him. Her bare feet made no sound on the wooden floor. "I have something to tell you," she said, voice low. Randy set the knife aside and looked up. She sat across from him, hands folded in her lap, eyes steady but unreadable. "My name's not Naomi," she began. "It never was." Randy didn't blink. He waited. She took a breath. "My real name is Sayan. It means bringer of life. My mother named me on the night of a blood moon. She said it was a sign I'd carry fire and healing in equal measure." Sayan. The words seemed to shift the air itself. "I was 6 when she taught me to paint firebirds on bark," she continued, her voice distant. "She said they flew between worlds, messengers, watchers, survivors. The night they came, the soldiers, the men from town, she painted one on the door of our tent." Her hands trembled now. "They dragged us outside. I still remember the way her eyes looked when they set the tents on fire. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she just stared at them, like she was memorizing the faces of every man who did it." Randy leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching her as if the sound of her voice was a rare and fragile thing. "She pushed me into the hollow beneath the roots of a fallen cedar," Cyan said. "Told me to stay quiet, that if I lived, I'd have to carry something, not hate, not revenge, but the truth." She finally met his gaze. "You want truth, Randy? Here it is," her voice cracked. "If I wasn't half white, if I didn't have your blood in me too, would you have still cut me down from that tree?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached across the space between them and placed his hand gently against her cheek. The calluses on his fingers felt like worn leather, but his touch was tender, steady. "I don't love your blood," he said quietly. "I love the fight inside it." Cyan's lips parted slightly, a sharp breath catching in her throat. Her eyes searched his, and something old inside her, something that had braced for betrayal every day since the fire, began to soften. Then, slowly, she leaned forward. Their foreheads touched first, then their lips. The kiss was not desperate, not a hunger. It was a release, of fear, of silence, of the weight they had both carried too long. It lasted just long enough to say what neither of them had the words for. When they parted, she let her forehead rest against his. He kept his hand on her cheek, thumb brushing just below her eye. "You believe me?" she asked, almost a whisper. "I believed you the moment you drew that bird in the dirt," Randy murmured. Outside, the night deepened. The fire crackled low, and the desert wind shifted direction, as if the land had taken a breath and let it go. Inside the cabin, 2 people sat close enough to hear each other breathe. Not as strangers, not even as fugitives, but as 2 halves of something broken that had finally begun to mend. The sun had barely dipped beneath the horizon when the riders were seen on the ridge. Dust curled behind hooves like smoke over the earth. Randy Rayner watched from the fence post, one hand tight around his spyglass, the other resting near his revolver. Even from this distance, he could see the gleam of blue and brass, the U.S. cavalry. "They're coming," he muttered. Inside the cabin, Cyan stood at the window, her arms wrapped around her waist. She didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed fixed on the hills, as if by watching them she might slow the inevitable. A soft knock on the open door made her turn. Randy stepped in, removing his hat, his face drawn with the weight of a choice already made. "I saw the flag," he said. "They're about a day out, maybe less if they ride hard." Cyan nodded once, slowly. "You knew they would come." "I did." "And you stayed." He stepped closer, placed his hat on the table, and looked her full in the face. "I stayed, because this, us, it's worth more than the dirt they want to bury you in." She looked down, her fingers tightening on the fabric of her blouse. "They won't stop, Randy." "I know," he said, "which is why we can't stay." Cyan lifted her eyes. "Run?" He shook his head. "Not run, just ride somewhere else. Somewhere their laws don't reach. South, over the border. There's land where no one knows your name, where they won't look at your skin like it's a crime." She didn't speak for a long time. Randy stepped closer, voice low, steady. "Cyan, I ain't asking you to hide. I'm asking you to live. With me." Her breath hitched. "I'm not afraid of them," she said. "Not anymore." "I know," he replied. "I'll go," she said, "but not to escape. I'll go to live, with you." A silence passed between them, soft, full, final. Then she smiled. It was small, sad, and true. That night, while the wind blew dry over the ridges, they prepared. Randy packed light, jerky, a canteen, a single blanket rolled tight. He saddled the horses with care, speaking to them in low murmurs. Cyan, dressed in simple brown cloth, her hair braided tight. Around her neck she tied a red thread, once part of her mother's shawl. They left before the moon rose. The cabin door swung shut behind them, unlatched. No fire was left burning. No trail marked the ground except hoofprints and the occasional scuff of a boot. The night was wide and quiet. The stars blinked like old gods watching. Two riders moved through the dark, not fugitives, not heroes, just a man and a woman with nothing left to give but themselves, and nowhere left to go but forward. As they crossed the dry creek bed at the edge of the valley, Cyan looked back once. "What is it?" Randy asked. She didn't answer at first. Then she said, "I'll remember the way the wind sounded here." He nodded. "I'll remember the first time you said my name." They rode on, silent again. Trust was no longer a question between them. It was the only thing they carried. The moon was high, full and pale as bone, casting silver light over the scrub brush and stone ridges that marked the edge of the known land. Only a few more miles and they would be across the border, free, unseen, forgotten by those who wished them buried. Randy's breath came in low, steady rhythm, eyes sweeping the trail ahead, body tense in the saddle. Cyan rode beside him, her fingers tight around the reins, the red thread at her neck fluttering in the breeze. Then came the shot. A crack through the silence, sharp, merciless. Randy jerked back in the saddle. Blood bloomed across his shirt like a crimson star. "Randy!" Cyan screamed, pulling hard on her horse's reins as he slumped sideways. He hit the ground hard, groaning, clutching his side. Another shot whizzed overhead. Cyan dropped to the ground, dragging Randy toward a nearby cut in the rock. An old wash eroded into a narrow crevice. She gritted her teeth against the pain in her shoulders as she hauled him out of the line of fire. The rocks scraped her knees, his weight dragged heavy across the gravel. Blood soaked through his fingers. He looked up at her, eyes glassy. "You were tied to a tree once," he rasped, "because of men like them. I won't let you be left behind, not again." Cyan pressed both hands to his wound, forcing the bleeding to slow. Her voice was steel. "Then don't die. We live together, or we fight together." She pulled his rifle from the scabbard, checked the chamber, and peeked through the gap in the rocks. Two cavalrymen were dismounting, moving slow through the brush. Too confident. Cyan set her jaw. She waited until one stepped clear into the moonlight, then fired. The shot hit his leg. He screamed and dropped. The other ducked for cover. She fired again, this time wide, to make them think more were waiting. They didn't come closer. Minutes passed, then more. Cyan didn't breathe until the hoofbeats faded into the distance. She turned back to Randy, who was barely conscious. "Stay with me," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "We're almost there." And somehow, they made it. By dawn, they had crossed the border. By nightfall, they found a clearing near a river bend, deep in the pines, where no patrols rode and no maps reached. Weeks passed. The wound healed slow. Randy walked with a limp now, but he lived. He trained horses again, though never let Cyan out of his sight for long. And in a small house built of pine and patience, Cyan Rayner sat by a window, stitching a tiny shirt no longer than her forearm. Her belly had rounded gently beneath her apron. Her hands moved slow, steady. Outside, Randy called softly to a young Mustang, guiding it around the corral. His voice was calm, his eyes always finding her silhouette behind the curtain. The past hadn't vanished, but here, it no longer hunted them. Inside, Cyan folded the shirt, held it to her chest, and smiled. Voice over. They hung her for being born half, but he loved her whole. Not for what she looked like, but for what she refused to become, broken.